The world stopped spinning the moment I saw them. My fiancé, Ethan, stood in the garden of our Manhattan venue, his arms wrapped around another Omega, their bodies pressed close in a way that screamed intimacy. I stood frozen, my white suit pristine, but my heart shattering, as the string quartet played on, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding under the fairy lights. I'm Lucas Harper, a 27-year-old Omega who believed in fairy tales until that moment. Growing up in a small upstate New York town, I'd always dreamed of a love that could conquer anything. Ethan Caldwell, a charming alpha with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers, had promised me forever. We met 3 years ago at a Greenwich Village bookstore, bonding over dog-eared copies of Whitman and a shared love for overpriced coffee. He was everything I'd ever wanted, steady, ambitious kind. Or so I thought. The wedding was supposed to be our triumph. After years of navigating societal whispers about alpha-omega pairings and my own family's reluctance to accept my identity, we planned a ceremony that screamed us elegant, heartfelt, and unapologetically queer. The venue, a rooftop garden in Chelsea, was draped in ivy and roses, with Manhattan's skyline as our backdrop. I'd spent months obsessing over every detail, from the lavender boutonnieres to the playlist of indie love songs. But now, as I watched Ethan's hands linger on the stranger's waist, all of it felt like a cruel joke. I didn't scream. I didn't storm over and demand answers. Instead, I turned and walked away, my polished shoes silent against the stone path. The weight of my decision pressed against my chest, but I kept moving, past the guests sipping champagne, past the caterers arranging canapes, and out into the humid Manhattan night. The city buzzed around me, taxis honking, neon signs flickering, but I felt like I was drowning in silence. I ended up in a dive bar in the East Village, the kind of place where the air smelled of stale beer and regret. I slid onto a stool, ordered a whiskey, and let the burn of it anchor me. My phone buzzed incessantly, Ethan's name flashing across the screen, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to hear his excuses, not when the image of him with that Omega was seared into my mind. Who was he? Why hadn't I seen this coming? And why, despite everything, did my heart still ache for Ethan? The bartender, a grizzled man with a Brooklyn accent, slid another drink my way. "Rough night, kid?" he asked, his eyes kind but tired. "You could say that," I muttered, staring into the amber liquid. "Ever have your whole life implode in a single moment?" He chuckled, wiping down the counter. "More times than I can count. But you're still here, ain't ya? That's something." His words, simple as they were, hit me hard. I was still here. I hadn't crumbled. Not yet. But as I sat there, nursing my drink, I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. What now? I'd built my world around Ethan, around the promise of us. Without him, who was I? The bar's jukebox kicked on, playing a slow, mournful tune that felt like it was written for me. I closed my eyes, letting the music wrap around me, and made a decision. I wasn't going back to that rooftop. I wasn't going to be the Omega who begged for answers or fought for a love that might have been a lie. I was going to find out who Lucas Harper was without Ethan Caldwell. I paid my tab and stepped back into the night, the city's pulse syncing with my own. Manhattan was vast, chaotic, and unforgiving, but it was also full of possibilities. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in hours, I felt a spark of something like hope. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something new. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap motel room on the edge of Hell's Kitchen, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the air smelled of cigarette smoke. My suit was crumpled on the floor, a stark reminder of the life I'd walked away from. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment I'd seen Ethan with that Omega, and felt a fresh wave of anger. Not at him, but at myself. How had I been so blind? I checked my phone. 27 missed calls, 14 texts, all from Ethan. The latest read: "Lucas, please, it's not what you think. Call me." I deleted it without replying. Instead, I pulled on jeans and a hoodie, grabbed my wallet, and headed out to clear my head. Manhattan streets were a maze of noise and color, but I needed their chaos to drown out my thoughts. I ended up at a small coffee shop in the West Village, the kind of place Ethan and I used to haunt. The barista, a white guy in his early 20s with tousled brown hair and a nose ring, flashed me a warm smile as he took my order. "Rough morning?" he asked, his voice light but perceptive. "Rough life?" I replied, managing a weak grin. He nodded, like he understood, and slid my latte across the counter. "Name's Caleb," he said. "If you need a refill, just holler." There was something about Caleb, his easy kindness, the way his hazel eyes crinkled when he smiled, that made me linger. I sat by the window, watching the world pass by, and let myself imagine, just for a moment, a life where I wasn't defined by Ethan's betrayal. Caleb came by to clear a nearby table, and we started talking, small things at first like the best dive bars in the city, then deeper stuff like dreams and regrets. He was an Omega 2, working his way through art school, painting murals in his spare time. His passion was infectious, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of lightness. But the lightness didn't last. That evening, Ethan showed up at the motel. I was stepping out of the shower when I heard the knock, followed by his voice, low and urgent. "Lucas, I know you're in there. Please, let me explain." I froze, towel in hand, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to open the door, to hear him out, but another part, the part that had walked away, knew better. "Go away, Ethan," I said through the door, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was a mistake," he pleaded. "He's just a friend from work. I swear it wasn't what it looked like." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "You expect me to believe that? On our wedding day?" Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking. "I love you, Lucas. I always will." Those words should have meant something, but they felt hollow. I didn't open the door. After a long moment, I heard his footsteps fade down the hall. I sank onto the bed, my chest tight with grief and relief. I'd made the right choice, hadn't I? The next day, I went back to the coffee shop. Caleb was there, sketching in a notebook between customers. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Back already? I must make a mean latte." "You do," I said, and this time, my smile was genuine. We talked again longer this time, and he invited me to an art gallery opening in Soho that weekend. I hesitated. My heart was still raw, but something in his eyes made me say yes. The gallery was a whirlwind of color and sound, filled with people who seemed to live and breathe art. Caleb's mural, a vibrant explosion of blues and golds depicting a city skyline, stole the show. He stood beside it, shy but proud, and I felt a pang of admiration. Here was someone who created beauty out of nothing, who didn't let the world's chaos dim his light. Maybe I could learn from that. As we walked through the gallery, our shoulders brushing, I realized I was laughing, really laughing for the first time since the wedding. Caleb didn't know my past, didn't know the weight I carried, but he saw me. And for now, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself rebuilding a life I hadn't planned. I moved into a tiny studio in Brooklyn, funded by savings I'd meant for our honeymoon. The apartment was cramped, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. I started working as a freelance graphic designer, taking on small projects to keep myself busy. And I kept going back to Caleb's coffee shop, drawn to his warmth like a moth to a flame. Caleb was different from Ethan. Where Ethan was polished and predictable, Caleb was raw, unfiltered, a burst of color in a grayscale world. He'd show up at my apartment with takeout and a sketchbook, filling my evenings with stories of his childhood in rural Pennsylvania and his dreams of painting murals across the city. One night, as we sat on my fire escape, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, tentative, but it set my heart racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, pulling back slightly. "I'm kind of a mess right now." He smiled, his fingers brushing mine. "Messes are my specialty. Besides, you're more than your past, Lucas." His words stayed with me, a lifeline in the storm of my emotions. But even as I let myself fall for Caleb, Ethan lingered like a ghost. He'd stopped calling, but I'd see him sometimes, on a subway platform, in a crowd at Union Square, his face a reminder of the life I'd lost. Each sighting was a knife to the gut, but I refused to let it break me. One evening, while walking home from client meeting, I ran into the Omega from a wedding. He was standing outside a deli, his blonde hair catching the streetlight. Up close, I recognized him. James, a co-worker of Ethan's I'd met once at a company party. He looked startled to see me, his eyes wide with guilt. "Lucas," he said, his voice soft, "I owe you an apology." I crossed my arms, my jaw tight. "For what?" "Hugging my fiancé on our wedding day." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." Ethan was upset about some family drama, and I was just comforting him. "It was stupid, and I'm sorry." His words didn't erase the pain, but they shifted something in me. Maybe Ethan hadn't cheated, but the trust was gone. I nodded, not forgiving but acknowledging, and walked away. For the first time, I felt lighter, like I was shedding a layer of hurt. Back in my apartment, I told Caleb everything. He listened, his hand resting on mine, and when I finished, he pulled me into a hug. "You're stronger than you know," he whispered, "and you deserve someone who sees that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I could be whole again. But as I leaned into his embrace, I couldn't shake the fear that I was building something new on the ruins of something broken. Could I trust Caleb? Could I trust myself? The answer came a week later when Caleb invited me to paint with him. We set up on a rooftop in Dumbo, the Brooklyn Bridge looming in the distance. He handed me a brush, and we worked side by side, splashing colors onto a canvas, laughing and teasing as paint smudged our clothes. In that moment, I felt free, not from the past, but from its hold on me. I was starting to see a future, one brushstroke at a time. By spring, Caleb and I were inseparable. We spent weekends exploring the city, flea markets in Williamsburg, jazz clubs in Harlem, quiet walks along the Hudson. He taught me to see beauty in the ordinary, to find joy in a cracked sidewalk or a stranger's smile. But even as our relationship deepened, I couldn't fully let go of the past. Ethan's betrayal had left scars, and I was terrified of being hurt again. One night, as we lay in my bed, the city humming outside, Caleb turned to me. "You're holding back," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I get it, but I'm not him, Lucas. I'm all in if you are." His words hit like a punch. I wanted to be all in, but fear clung to me like damp clothes. I kissed him, hoping to drown the doubt, but it lingered. The next day, I decided to confront it. I called Ethan, asking to meet at a neutral spot, a park in Midtown. I needed closure, not reconciliation. Ethan looked different when I saw him. Thinner, his eyes shadowed with regret. "I messed up," he said before I could speak. "I should have told you about James, about everything. I was scared of losing you, and I did anyway." I listened as he explained, his family's pressure to marry an alpha, his own doubts about being enough for me. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. I felt a strange mix of pity and relief. "I loved you," I said, my voice steady, "but I can't trust you anymore. I need to move on." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and we parted ways. It wasn't the dramatic closure I'd imagined, but it was enough. I walked back to Brooklyn, feeling lighter than I had in months. When I told Caleb about it, he didn't push or pry. He just held me, his presence a quiet promise. Summer brought new challenges. Caleb got a commission to paint a mural in Chicago, and he asked me to come with him for the month-long project. It was a big step, leaving New York, leaving the safety of my routine. But I said yes, driven by a need to prove I could take risks again. Chicago was vibrant and unfamiliar, and working alongside Caleb, I found a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. We painted, laughed, and fell deeper in love under the Midwest sky. One night, as we sat by Lake Michigan, Caleb took my hand. "I want a future with you," he said. "Not just today, but all the days after." I looked at him, his face illuminated by the moonlight, and felt something settle in me. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now, drowned out by the certainty of my feelings. "I want that too," I said and meant it. When we returned to New York, I felt like a different person, Not the Omega who'd walked away from a wedding, but someone stronger, someone who'd chosen himself. Caleb and I started planning a life together, not with grand gestures, but with small, meaningful steps. We were building something real, and for the first time, I believe it could last. A year after the wedding that never was, I stood on a rooftop in Brooklyn, watching the sunset with Caleb. The city sprawled before us, a tapestry of light and shadow, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. We weren't perfect. There were arguments, insecurities, moments of doubt, but we faced them together, our hands intertwined. That night, Caleb proposed, not with a ring or a grand speech, but with a canvas he'd painted, a scene of us on that Dumbo rooftop, our first moment of freedom captured in vibrant hues. "Marry me," he said, his voice soft but sure. "Not because it's expected, but because it's us." I said yes, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't about erasing the past or proving a point. It was about choosing love, not out of desperation, but out of strength. We planned a small ceremony, just us and a few friends, in a park under the Manhattan Bridge. No fairy lights, no string quartet, just love, raw and real. The day of the wedding, I felt no fear. I wore a simple suit, my heart light, as I walked toward Caleb. He stood waiting, his smile brighter than the summer sun. As we exchanged vows, I thought of the journey that had brought me here. Not just the pain, but the growth, the resilience, the discovery of who I was beyond the heartbreak. "I choose you," I said, my voice steady. "Today, and every day after." Caleb's eyes shone with tears. "I choose you too, Lucas. Always." We kissed, the city cheering around us, and I knew this was the ending I'd been searching for. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something true. The guests clapped, their voices a warm hum, and I felt a surge of gratitude. For Caleb, for myself, for the strength to walk away and the courage to start again. As we danced under the stars, I thought of Ethan, not with anger, but with a quiet acknowledgement. His betrayal had broken me, but it had also set me free. I'd found love again, not because I needed it to complete me, but because I'd learned to complete myself. Caleb was my partner, not my savior, and together, we were unstoppable. The night stretched on, filled with laughter and music, and I realized this was what love was supposed to be, a choice, a journey, a home. I'd walked away from a wedding and found a life. And as I held Caleb's hand, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind us, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.